Tell me about your journey growing up with a mother who struggled with mental health issues, and want to know, how was that growing up in that environment, and what did you learn from it? What were your biggest takeaways that we should know for people who also may have family members that are struggling?
So, um, so my mother had schizophrenia, and I did not realize that there was something wrong with my mom until when I was in first grade. We had to move back to San Antonio because my mother was put in the hospital. I didn't really understand what was going on at the time, but I thought it was a little weird that we had to move back to San Antonio. We lived in the valley at the time. And then when she got out of the hospital, we went back home. And all of a sudden, she just wasn't the same mom. She would be awake for long periods of time. She would have funny facial movements. She would cry. Um, and I still didn't truly understand what was going on. And I think I was probably in third grade or so. Um, and she chased me out of the house, following me with a belt, and I ran to school. Um, and then I remember having belt marks on my arm, and the teachers asked me what the belt marks were because my mother had hit me. And I said, "Oh, I fell down the stairs." And I think back as an adult, and especially as a doctor now, and wonder how could they have thought that that was really falling down. But so then I get home, and my brother had bruises all the way in his neck and his back. And so as I grow up, as I have grown up, I realized that she was in her manic state, couldn't deal with my little brother, who was probably about maybe 4 at the time, because as we know, little boys can be very rambunctious. And then when we were in middle school, my parents got separated, and it was because of a lot of fighting. And I think he had a lot of issues with her, as well as he was an alcoholic. And so my parents got separated, and then my mother took a really difficult turn for the worst. She was hearing voices. She gave away all our money. We couldn't buy groceries. And then my grandfather came and basically kind of took over. And the one thing I do remember about my grandfather is I woke up one day and he's kneeling on the couch, facing backwards, and he's praying. And so from a very young age, I knew that God was with me. I was brought up in the church, in an Assembly of God church. But that's where the big portion of my journey with mental illness started. We had to move back to San Antonio. We moved from house to house because my mother was in the mental hospital a lot. And then finally, we got government housing, which was a trial in itself. We got government housing, we were on Medicaid, we were on welfare, we were all that. And unfortunately, my mother was in and out of the hospital. And it got to the point where my older sister and I, she was in high school, I was in middle school, we basically played mom because my mother was not home. And so we'd have to get up in the morning, get our brother and sister ready, have them have breakfast, send them off to school. We went to school, and our brother and sister would wait outside our house until we got home from school. And it was a very bad neighborhood. So I became very, very afraid. We used to hear gunshots in the neighborhood. We used to smell marijuana in the neighborhood. So it was very stressful for us. And I think that's where I probably developed some of my anxiety. Um, I How I dealt with it was I went to school. I ran away, and my getaway, my runaway was going to school. I I excelled because I did not want my children to have to go through, if I when I grew up, to go through what I went through. I also knew that if I was in school, my mom couldn't abuse me, and I didn't have to deal with the stress of the things my mother did. Again, she had delusions. She had would hear voices. She chased me out of the house once with a rolling pin. She almost got this close to hitting me over the head. She broke a brush on my head one time. So I luckily, by the grace of God, was able to succeed in school. I was able to go to college. I was able to go to med school and become a physician. However, all of those things, dealing with my mother, going through the trials and tribulations that I went through, really changed me, made me fearful, uh, made me not trust people, made me not trust adults. But I was very blessed in that I again grew up in a Christian home. Sister Mary Lopez, who was a founding member of our church, is my aunt, and she covered me in prayer, helped me raise my children. But it also affected me as a mother. I think that I probably was not as probably not as good a mother, I would have to say. And what do I mean by that? I don't feel like I, at the very early on, knew how to be a mother because of the experiences that I had with my mother. I remember going to visit friends and thinking, oh, so that's what it's like to have a home. That's what it's like to have a family. Um, and luckily, I met my husband, Michael, with a very stable family. And I was able to learn what it was, how to be a good mom and how to be a good parent. But it still affected me. There's a genetic component to mental illness, which not everybody understands. My mother's mother had some sense of mental illness, and I'm not going to say that mental illness and the people that I mentioned because I don't think they've given me permission. She had an uncle who suffered with mental illness. She has a brother that suffers with mental illness. My younger brother passed away and he suffered from mental illness. He didn't die of his mental illness. As I've said, my mother has schizophrenia. I have a sister that struggles with severe mental illness, and I was her caregiver for quite a while, and that interfered with my being able to take care of my children. I also, in the with her being ill and ending up in the hospital, I ended up having to take care of her children for a small period of time. Some of the people in church might remember I had my nieces for about a year because she was in the hospital and couldn't take care of her children. And then, of course, some of my children struggle with anxiety. And unfortunately, in 2020, I lost one of my sons to suicide, and he struggled with depression and suicide. And that continues to affect my life as a mom. It continues to affect my life as a physician, continues to affect my life as a wife. Um, but I also realized that um, God uses all things. I frequently used to ask the Lord, why do I have to be the child of a mother with schizophrenia? Why do I have to be the sister of somebody with mental illness? I developed postpartum depression with my second child, and I questioned again. But I have learned that the Lord uses that. I'm able to speak to lots of people, lots of friends, family. People will call me, text me, page me. Okay, maybe not page anymore, right? Text me, Facebook me, message me, and ask me, hey, I need your help. And because I've had to walk that difficult walk of having to admit my mother to a hospital, having to admit my sister, I know all the legal routes, and I've been able to help other people. I have many families, moms especially, who call me and ask for my opinion on, how do I handle my child and how do I help my child. So while it's been very difficult and it has affected every area of my life, I now can thank God and say that even through these difficulties, I have been blessed because I can help others through the difficulty I've gone through.
Let's zoom in real quick um, to your relationship with your mom. How was she ever diagnosed? And when was she diagnosed? Were you a child? Were you a teen, an adult? And how did you deal with it as a child, not really knowing, at the time what was really going on?
So I know that my mother was diagnosed when I was in first grade. I look back now, and in speaking to my aunts, they say that they knew all along that my mother was different. But as a child, I did not know. Um, I probably didn't really know or understand till I was in middle school. But we would have to walk on eggshells. We knew that we couldn't get her too upset. We knew that we had to make sure that we did things just right. My sister knew that she had to iron my dad's clothes, otherwise, my mom would get upset. Um, we knew that we didn't want to invite people over. We didn't want to invite friends over because we were very uncomfortable. Um, we did go to church all the time, but you just you just know that you can't say certain things. You There's a certain look in her eye that I can tell you that I knew when I woke up in the morning and I looked in her eye. I knew she was having a bad day. And as I got older, I knew when she was hearing voices and when she was delusional because I could tell by the look in her eye. There were times where she would not allow me to go to school. So I had to skip school because she wanted me to stay home with her because she didn't feel comfortable, or she wanted somebody to be with her because she was either scared or feeling sick. And so I would have to miss school. And as I said earlier, school was my getaway, was my safe haven. Um, and I knew that my sister and I both knew that we had to protect my little brother and my little sister. And there were times that we got in front of them and let her abuse us so that she would not abuse the our younger brother and sister. So it was it was difficult growing up. And I will tell you, my older sister and I used to, now as we're older, we've said to each other, I never thought that I was going to live past high school. I never thought we were going to graduate. We thought, with the abuse, we really thought we were not going to live to make it to high school. We didn't, um, I guess we didn't think that far. And it wasn't until, I got to high school and had some wonderful teachers that encouraged me and saw my potential that I was able to go forward. But honestly, people have asked me how did I decide to become a physician, and I tell them I have no idea because I never would have thought that I could have graduated from high school. So it's a God thing. Um, and after Roel was born, after 99, my right before 99, my mother had a stroke. And after the stroke, she was never the same again. So, probably for 10 years before that, 10 or 15 years before that, she was on some medication that they finally got it correct. So, I would visit with her. I had a relationship with her. She knew my kids knew her. But in 99, she had a stroke and they were never able to get her medication correct again. And so she became this very mean, belligerent um, lady. And we had to put her in a nursing home because she was not mobile. And because of my working hours, I could not take care of her 24/7. Um, and I will be very honest with you and say that it got to the point where I really didn't even want to go see her. But I knew it was my responsibility. I know that the Bible says you need to honor your mother and father. And honestly, I was the only one in my family that could do it at the time as a daughter. And there was a time when the Lord said to me, okay, I need you to tell her that you love her. And I remember telling the Lord, really? Exactly like that. I said, really? And I'm like, but I don't. I know that sounds horrible because of all the pain. And the Lord said to me, it'll get easier. And I will tell you that it did. And then a few months later, the Lord said, I need you to give her a kiss. And I was like, the same face I'm making to you is the same face I made to the Lord. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. And so I still remember going in that day and going, Lord, and I did. I went ahead and kissed her. And every time I went after that to see her, I would tell her I love her and I kissed her and it got easier. And then the Lord said, I need you to pray for her. And I'm like, okay, Lord, I already tell her I love her. I already kiss her. And so the Lord asked me to start praying for her. And so I did. And the Lord softened my heart and was able to allow me to forgive all of those things and allowed me to put together as a physician that this was not my mother, that it was the illness. And it wouldn't be my mother treating me this way if she was not ill. And I got even more blessed because then I would show up to the nursing home to pray for her and to see her. And the other ladies would say to me, can you pray for me? And my mother loved avocado and Mexican food. And so I would always bring her avocado and Mexican food. And then the other ladies would say, hey, can you bring me something? And so while it has been extremely difficult, there have been blessings along the way.
Amen. Next question. Being that you're a physician, but also a Christian, when it comes to mental health issues, how do you respond and how would you educate people so that they know that there's a biological component, but that there's also a spiritual component? How do you differentiate the two?
As a physician, I have to deal with the medical realities of what I am taught and what I know. So I'm a neonatologist, so I deal with premature babies, but I also take care of their moms that deal with postpartum depression. I have moms that deal with depression, period, that deal with anxiety, that deal with other mental illnesses. And one of the biggest things that I hear, not just from the mothers, but from lots of people in the community, is I don't want to take medication. I don't want to take medication. And one of the things that I remind them is, okay, so if your mother, father, brother, sister had diabetes, okay, and they need to take insulin, would you tell them not to take their insulin? They're like, well, no, they need it because they're diabetic. And I'm like, okay, if your family member has chemo and they tell us that if we treat them with chemo, there's a 90 to 95% chance that we can treat this leukemia, this breast cancer, this cervical cancer. Would you tell them not to take it because it's a drug? And they're like, well, no. And that's when I explain to people, well, the brain is the same thing. The brain is an organ, just like the pancreas, just like the lungs, just like the breast, just like the uterus. It is an organ. And the brain can malfunction just like any other organ. There are numerous enzymes, numerous receptors, numerous things that can go wrong in the brain. For mental health, a couple of things that can be too high or too low are dopamine and serotonin. And so when we give a medication to control, to help with the levels of serotonin or dopamine or whatever it is in whichever mental illness that you have, it is no different treating that organ than it is treating the pancreas or treating the lungs. So when I have told the mothers this, they're like, nobody has ever explained it that way. Because for years, if somebody was depressed, or if somebody had a mental illness, what did we call them? Crazy. Right? That's what we call them, crazy. And I'm a firm believer that some of us have a genetic component towards mental illness. Sometimes it is a situational. What do I mean by that? Okay, so in any illness, a lot of us can have a propensity for any particular illness. So I'm going to say cystic fibrosis, which is which is an illness within the lungs. So you can have any type, any expanse from a mild to nothing to severe. So it just depends. Some will never show any illness portion of it until they get sick. Others are born right away. Their lungs don't work. They don't make the appropriate mucus, and they can't stool properly. It has to do with a lot to do with the pancreas as well. And so we have to treat them right away. Well, mental illness works the same. You may not you may be somebody who has a propensity to be depressed. You may be somebody who has a propensity to be anxious, but you have not been put in the situation for that to happen. You may have been in a very loving, productive home. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen in those homes, because it does as well. Um, but a lot of times it's not until you get into that situation, when you get to college and things get so stressful, when you have that job and that job becomes very stressful, and you don't have the, how do I say it? You don't have the ability or the knowledge or the behavioral uh, modifications to be able to deal with that stress. Some people know, okay, I've reached my limit, I need to step outside. Some people know to, I tell a lot of people, say Jesus 10 times, take a deep breath. Uh, some people don't have those coping, there it is, that's the word I needed to hear, coping mechanisms. Some people don't have the coping mechanisms to deal with that stress. Other people do. And some people have the coping mechanisms, so no problem. Some people can have the coping mechanisms, but now have the propensity or that genetic possibility that they could develop depression, so then they do. Okay. However, the Bible also says for us to take our thoughts captive. As somebody who has struggled with anxiety, and I do every once in a while, I will say right here again about my son who died in 2020. After he passed away from suicide, I could not pray. I tried and I just couldn't pray. And when I tried to pray, Satan would go, but that didn't work for Roel. And I would try, I've memorized scripture. I used to be a missionate teacher forever, so I know a lot of scripture. And I would try to start my prayer, and Satan would say to me, well, that didn't work for Roel, or God didn't save Roel. And so it was unbelievably difficult. I think I went through about a 2 to 3 month struggle where I could not seem to be able to pray. I couldn't seem to be able to take those thoughts captive. And I think part of it is because I was in such severe grief. And then the Lord turned me to a book. I can't remember the name of it. I want to say it's Hope. It's by Ginger Ravelet and Jim Ravelet. Ginger attended our school, San Antonio Christian, and her husband, Troy, was killed in Afghanistan when her twins were just 5 months old. Well, she wrote a book, and in the book, there was a scripture in the book. And I remember getting to the scripture, and I want to say it's in Psalm 139, that said that all of our days were numbered, that God had counted all our days. And I literally stopped in the middle of that scripture. And I was like, oh my gosh. So then after that day, every time that I would try to pray and Satan would do that, I quoted that scripture. And so I was able to take my thoughts captive. Now, do I still have issues with anxiety? Absolutely. I think all of us do it to some degree when stress gets very high. But now I'm at a point where I can take my thoughts captive. What did I do during those times that I couldn't? I would turn to mentors. I would turn to people who would pray for me. People knew what I was going through, and they would send me scripture. They would send me, let me know they were praying for me. And so I think that one, learning about mental health and mental illness, but I think the other thing is also, it's really hard to tell people what you're going through. But I think that if we can be a little vulnerable and find those people that you trust, and there are many in this church that helped me through this, that you can open up to them and say, hey, I'm having a hard time. I'm struggling. Can you pray with me? Can you pray for me? I have a friend to this very day, and she is one of the Air Force moms who, for 3 years, she sent me a text every single day. She asked me, what do I need? what do I need? How can I help you? And I said, just pray with me. Just pray for me. She would send me scripture. She would send me memes. She would send me a devotional for that day. And I think part of being a person who is struggling with either depression, anxiety, grief, any other mental health issue is finding your people that you trust that can help you, finding that group of people that you can be accountable to, but that are going to listen to you. That's one of the things I tell people is people don't lie about being depressed. People don't lie about having anxiety. People don't lie about feeling suicidal. When they tell you these things, they're telling you the truth. People lie about being fine. People lie about not being depressed because people lie about not being in grief because we can't find the people that understand us and won't judge us. So if somebody trusts you enough to tell you that that's what's going on, stop what you're doing and listen. Because usually what they need is just somebody to listen, somebody to give them that hug and tell them, I'm here. What can I do for you? Somebody who's going to check in on them so that they feel like they care. When my son took his life, of course, it was extremely difficult for us, and I didn't understand. Suicide is a very difficult thing. But I found one of his journals, and in his journal, he said, I want to live. And then since that time, I have had a few friends that have been willing to open up to me because they know what I've been through and they knew what I was going through, that said to me, Dr. B, Roel did not want to die. Roel did not, he wasn't thinking about you at that time. They said he didn't mean to hurt you. He just wanted the pain to stop. And people have come up to me and said they were in the same position that Roel was in. And the tunnel got so dark and the pain got so deep that all they wanted was the pain to end. They didn't want to die. They just wanted the pain to end. And this was the only way they knew to end it. So if there's any way that we as individuals, we as a church, we as a person can listen, it makes such a big difference. And what I have found is that a lot of people in depression are very, very lonely. I've been told that they can stand in a room full of people and feel completely alone. And that's something that I think people don't understand because I didn't understand and I didn't know until now. But I do think that Satan took a hold of my son. I do. I do think that he was not able to take his thoughts captive. And how do I know this? Because I remember I was having a conversation with my girlfriend B Signs, and I said to her, I don't understand. I get these thoughts and I don't know where they're coming from. And so I was in my early 30s, and I remember thinking, I think I'm developing schizophrenia because I couldn't understand. Those were not my thoughts. And she looked at me and she said, Isabel, that's Satan. I had no idea. And I don't know how many people realize that. And I don't know that Roel necessarily understood that the thoughts that he had weren't his thoughts and that Satan can put thoughts in our minds. I don't know what how your feeling is or what your feeling is on that, but I can tell you, being a Christian, that I can be going down the road and a thought can come in my brain and I'm like, okay, where did that come from? And I know it's not me. And I have to take that thought captive and I have to say, no, I'm a child of God. I know that that is not of God. God is not condemning me. God does not, God lifts me up. God does not condemn me. And I think that that's something that I wish people would understand, that there are some thoughts that are not your thoughts. And just because you have that thought doesn't make you a bad person or a mentally ill person. Um, but if you're hearing voices, that's a different story. That is delusional, and that is part of schizophrenia. But there are medications for that as well.
Wow. You you just you walked me through so much.
I'm sorry.
No, this is absolutely gold. I think a lot of people need to hear about this. And my thing is when you when somebody has a family member, or maybe it's themselves that are going through the mental illness, and maybe they're going through depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, all of those things. I mean, um, there's, like I said, there's the biological perspective, which you
Yes.
clearly laid out, and then there's the spiritual perspective, which you clearly laid out. So what you're saying is it's both.
Yes.
It's both. So if you don't mind me going there for you, as you walk through your personal journey after Roel, um, after the Roel incident, how did you handle it, both in medical terms but also in spiritual terms?
Um, so a lot of people don't know or remember. Um, it was 2020, and unfortunately, 2020 was COVID time. So for me, it was a blessing and it was a curse. It was a blessing because when you're going through grief, the last thing you want to do is be around people. Um, and one of the things that I have learned through my grief journey is that people come up to you and ask you, "How are you doing?" And if you tell them you're not doing well, they go, "Oh," and they just kind of walk off. Honestly, because the realities are they don't know how to deal. They don't know how to deal with what you're going through. They don't understand what you're going through. And they just don't know what to say. Um, and if you start to cry, which I did many a times, it would people would tell me, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to make you cry." And I used to tell people, "You didn't make me cry. It's right there. I'm fighting every day, every moment, even right now, to hold myself back from crying. So you're not making me cry. You're giving me permission to cry." But that's really hard for people. So, um, I the other thing that I found was that it became very difficult for my children to watch me cry. And so I had to find ways to cry on my own. And I realized that it was also very difficult for my husband to watch me cry. Um, and husbands and wives go through grief differently. And they also deal with stress differently. I don't have to tell you, you know that. So I had to find ways to, I would cry in my car. I would pray in my car. I had the blessing that many people sent me many books on how to deal after suicide, how to deal with death. I was very blessed that the church here realized that we needed to do something about grief, and we started Grief Share. We did it virtually for a few times, and it made such an impact on my life. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that helped me walking through my grief journey. And I was able to bring a lot of other moms that were whose children had passed by suicide into Grief Share with us to help us during this time. So, one of the things again that I did was Grief Share. Once I was able to start praying again, I started praying again. I started to read my Bible, and I read a lot of the books. And I found a support group online of women that were going through the same thing that I was going through. We there was about 8 or 10 of us moms locally, and what I mean by locally is San Antonio and the surrounding area, that developed a Zoom call. And so we would get on Zoom and meet with each other once a week for the first probably year. And we would help each other out through what we were going through. We would talk about our children, because it was an open that's the other thing I have found, that most people don't want to talk to me about Roel. They have a hard time. They think that talking to me about Roel is going to make me cry, and they have a hard time with my crying. So I had to find a group of moms that were going through or have gone through what I went through to help me get through it. And luckily, this was also a group of Christian moms. So we could help each other with what we were going through and the feelings that we were having, both about religion and Christ, and how we would feel guilty because we didn't feel like we were praying enough, or we weren't in church enough, or I never questioned God. I will tell you that. I never questioned God, and I was never, well, that's a lie. I can't say I didn't question God. I did. I was never mad at God. And I found that a lot of my moms were. And I was able to tell them, you know what? You be mad at God. You be as mad as you want to be, because God can handle our anger. God can handle our madness. Ask him all the questions you want, because he understands. Christ was human, and he had human emotions. And I think we were able to help each other through. Some of us were some of us had questions, some of us were angry, some of us didn't understand. One of the nice things was we all found scriptures at different times, and so we were able to share that with each other. So I think finding a community. There were different books that I was given, that I read, that helped me. Um, how did I deal with it physically? So I will tell you that it felt like I was having a heart attack. I did not. My body ached, my head hurt. I was super weak. And it wasn't until one of the ladies said that one of her friends asked her, "Do you feel like you're having a heart attack yet?" And she's like, "What do you mean?" She said, "Grief feels like unbelievable chest pain." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is part of grief." So again, it was trying to understand with other women what you go through. I also eventually went to go see my doctor after much prodding from family and friends, because unfortunately I also gained a lot of weight during this time period. Um, so it was dealing with it medically, dealing with it physically. I would go on walks. I would go on runs. I would sit outside, and um, nature is a very good comforter, brings you a lot of peace. So that's how I was able to get through some of my grief. I will tell you that it's not done for me. There are days that I still get what I call waves of grief that come, and I'm like, whoa. And I never know when it's coming. I don't know what the situation's going to be. Most recently, it has been one of Roel's roommates is getting married, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks that that's something I'm not going to get to do. Um, but I'll be very honest that I'm very happy for him. I'm very joyful for his roommate. And so it's you feel like you live in half in your happy state and half in your sad state. Um, and I can cry and be happy, and I can laugh and be sad. And I have learned to be okay with both of them. And I have learned to understand that sometimes I'm not going to be okay, and that that's okay as well.
Mm. Have you met anybody that maybe you were able to minister to that maybe they weren't a believer in Jesus, they weren't following God, and they're now struck with some sort of a tragedy, mental health issue, depression? Have you met anybody that maybe did the opposite of turning to God, and what does that look like?
So I'm going to go back to way even before Roel. So when I first joined my practice about 20 years ago, um, one of my colleagues' husbands died by suicide, and that was my first, it, I guess, experience with it.
And what, real quick, I noticed you said died by suicide.
Yes.
Can you expand on that before you go on with your story?
So most people say committed suicide, And to me, committed is something that you want to do, like committing a crime. Nobody ever says committed, um, unless it's like marriage. Most people say committed murder or committed this, committed that. And I say died by suicide because my son did not want to die. And he definitely did not want to die by suicide. I remember when he first told us that he was having suicidal thoughts. He was a junior in high school. And he specifically said to me, Mom, the reason that I haven't done anything is because I would never want to hurt you and Dad. I would never take my life because I would never want to hurt you. And when my husband came to tell me that he had died by suicide, the first thing I said to him was, no, there's no way. Roel said he would never do that. And after finding his journal that said he wanted to live, after finding going to go clean his room out at the university and finding his Bible open on his bed, after looking at his phone and finding that he had spoken to one of his Christian or was texting one of his Christian friends about a biblical question, I knew that my son did not commit suicide. He died by suicide because his pain was too much for him. And because I have had friends tell me that they did not want to die once they attempted suicide, I realized that it's not something that they're committed to. What they're committed to is stopping the pain, not committing suicide, which is why I say died by suicide or lost their life to mental illness. That's usually when somebody asks me how my son died, I either say he lost his battle with mental illness. I usually say he lost his battle with mental illness and he died by suicide. That's usually how I word it.
You had this happen with a friend 20 years ago, you said?
Yes. And so when I remember she said to me, how is it? We happened to be in a conversation and I was telling her about my life. I was telling her about my mother and schizophrenia and mental illness and something I haven't shared here yet. My father was murdered when I was a senior in high school. And so I remember I was telling her my whole story and she said to me, how can you be so happy? How have you survived everything that you've gone through? And of course, this was way before Roel. And I said, it's the Lord. And she's like, what do you mean? And I said, well, when things get hard, when I feel like I can't handle it, I run to the Lord and I run even faster to the Lord. And she said to me, that's funny because when things get hard, I run away. I run away from the Lord and not to the Lord. I still work with this friend. I don't know that she has come any closer to the Lord, but I did minister to her about that. And I remember very early on in my career having a lot of difficulty with some people. And I remember asking one of the girls, I don't understand. Why are they so mean to me? Why do they treat me this way? And she looked at me and she's like, you don't know? And I'm like, no. And she's like, they cannot stand that you come in here happy, that you come in here and say hello to everybody, that you are just, they can't stand the joy of the Lord inside you. So do I minister to people? Yes. Have I spoken to mothers at work? Have I prayed with them and for them? Absolutely. And I have had people thank me for praying for them. I have had people ask me where I go to church. I have had people, friends, turn to the Lord. And I will tell you that I have heard from friends of Roel that have said, going to our service, our celebration of life, both on the night service and the day service, made them commit their life to the Lord. That they might have gone to Christian school their entire life, but having this happen made them realize that they were not at a place where they should have been. So I have also heard from many of my colleagues. I don't know if I should say colleagues, but I do consider the nurses and the staff that I work with my colleagues, that have said to me, "You changed me. You, a lot of people told me they had never heard Waymaker before, and it became their favorite song. It was played at Roel's funeral. Um, I've heard people say to me, you made me go home and talk to my kids. You made me realize that my child was suffering, and you made it okay for us to go get my child help."
Love that. So I think I have about two more questions.
Okay.
The next one is, what are some things that, or reasons why people maybe treat the mental health, depression? Why do we treat it as taboo? And what kind of what can we equip people with, so that way, instead of treating it that way, how can we as a community, as a church, how can we begin to help shine that light on people without, like, what do we say? What do we do? Why is this a subject that not a lot of people want to talk about, and how do we overcome that obstacle?
Well, I think part of it is society. For a very long time, if you had a mental illness, you were crazy. If you had a mental illness, you were institutionalized. Okay, so I think it goes back to then, and I also think it goes back to some religions that believe suicide is a sin. A lot of people treat suicide and mental illness as a sin. So if you have a mental illness, it's because you're not right with the Lord. So I think that has had a lot to do with it, with why people don't deal with it, why the church doesn't deal with it. Because even growing up in the church, I will tell you that I remember feeling that mental illness was a sin, and nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody wanted to bring it up because, oh, that sister, she's a little crazy. That sister, she's just not right. Um, but I will tell you that there have been big breakthroughs both in society, I think, and in the church. Um, a lot of the celebrities have started talking about mental illness and have started discussing their mental illness. There has been a lot in the community where we're trying to get more hospitals, more clinics. We're trying to do things in the medical arena to bring it to the forefront and to provide more assistance and more resources. And I truly think that Rick Warren losing his son to suicide a few years ago also has brought it to the forefront of the church. I truly do. Um, a lot of people don't know, Kay Warren does a conference once a year for moms that have lost a child to suicide, and she has a podcast on mental illness as well. So I think that it is starting to come forward. I truly do. What do we do? I think that as individuals and as the church, we become sympathetic. I think we educate ourselves. I think maybe we find or see if we can't find some volunteers in the church that are willing to be that person that maybe has resources, that are maybe willing to be that person or people um, who are who are willing to check up on people that come and say that they have mental illness. And I think really, Pastor Randy Sean, I think really just even addressing it the way we're going to address it and letting people know that we care, I think is going to is going to help our church members go, okay, so I can come and say something. I can come and talk to somebody. I can come and, you know, let them know that I'm having a difficult time. I think that once we address this, we're going to be surprised at how many people actually either are struggling or have struggled.
So, one last thing is, if people are dealing with this themselves or with their family, if you could just give maybe real quick pieces of advice. You know, it might be a resource, it might be a book,
Right.
it might be a podcast. might be getting into a group. Maybe I'm giving you that idea.
Right.
What if you had just a few nuggets of, I, I think that these things would be the most valuable things that you can do. What would those things be?
So, first of all, I ask that you try to figure out what do you really think is going on. Okay. Um, what do I mean by that? Do we think it's situational? Um, do we think it's true depression? One of the first things I would say is you need to get somebody to get them to see somebody, whether it is a physician, whether it's a therapist, whether it's a psychiatrist, depending again on your resources. University has something called CareLink if you don't have insurance that you could sign up for, and they have a huge program now for mental illness for children as well as teens as well as young adults. Um, there are numerous books out there. I didn't know you were going to ask me that, so I don't have the lists with me. But there are many books out there dealing with mental illness. San Antonio Chamber of Commerce has some resources on their site for mental illness. Now, this is just like if it's not just like, but if it's the beginnings of anxiety, the beginnings of depression, and you need to get some help. The first thing is, I still remember when Roel came to tell us that he was depressed. We went and found. I'm blessed because I have resources and I have friends that I could call and get him in. But I remember the first thing he said to us was, I can't believe you went and got me help right away. Thank you so much. So I think just acknowledging to that person, whether it's your child, your family member, a friend, that you understand that there is something that they're dealing with, and that you're willing to help figure it out. Now, if it is something severe, like like uh, like truly mentally ill with violence, they're being a threat to themselves or they're being a threat to somebody else, and trust me, that happens, and I get called about that a lot as well. There is a mental health court that you can actually go downtown. You can fill out some paperwork and you can let them know the person's name, address, and why you're filling out the paperwork for this particular individual. You do go before the judge and you tell the judge what you think is going on. If they feel that that person is a threat to themselves or somebody else, they will issue a warrant out for their arrest. I know that sounds horrible, but sometimes I will tell you that that was the only way that I could get my mother committed. That was the only way that I could get some of my siblings committed. And so they will ask you where the individual is going to be. They will go there. They will pick them up, and it is done with utmost dignity. They don't take them to jail. They take them to be seen by one of the mental health doctors in the community, there's different mental health hospitals throughout the city that they will take them to, and they will be evaluated. They can be committed up to 72 hours so that the medical provider can decide if they truly think they meet the criteria for being admitted and truly need help, or they will, if they think no, this person really is not suicidal, this person is not a threat to themselves or somebody else, then they could actually let them go home. However, any individual can say, I want to voluntarily commit myself. Okay, so say I'm worried and I've called because my son is having a mental breakdown, and I call the police and the police are about to take him in, and he says, okay, I want to commit myself for 70, I'm voluntarily committing myself. Now once they voluntarily commit themselves, they can walk out anytime they want. So that's something people don't actually know. But there are people that can help. And there are people in the community that can help as well. Um, Again, I didn't know you would ask me. I would have brought my whole resource list with me.
What we can do is we can put the list later
Yeah,
on the notes of the video.
right, right. But and I know we also have somebody in the church, don't we?
We have a counselor, Pastor
Right,
Mike Bingaman,
right,
and he's great. And
right.
he meets with people all the time.
Correct. So we have that as well. Um, One of the things that want to also tell people is that some people don't realize that ADHD, in the sense, can also be a mental illness. Um, and why do I say that? Well, Roel had ADHD, and what we are finding out now is that some of the kids that had ADHD back then are now the kids that are growing up and having anxiety and or depression. So I think that we need to also look at our ADHD kids and try to help them, mold them, teach them coping mechanisms. There are a few resources in the community that I know of physicians that don't they will prescribe medication if they think is needed, but the first thing they do is they work on behavioral health, on teaching them how to try to bring their anxiety down, teaching them, okay, when your heart rate gets to be this high, it's time to take a breath. It's time to, and they teach them all the different things that they can do to help with that. There's also classes in the community where people can go to that will also, like basically outpatient care. Like they can attend classes talking about helping them with depression and anxiety and teaching them those coping mechanisms. And then you're kind of like in a community. I know Laurel Ridge provides some of that because Roel took a course for a few weeks as well. So I think there's a lot of things that people don't realize that are out there. But I also know that the church is also a good resource. I know that reaching out to our connect group leaders, reaching out to our pastors, reaching out to what's his name? Bigeman? What's his first name? Mike Bigeman. So there are resources within the church as well. I realize that sometimes it's difficult because we don't want people to know what's going on. But there are also other churches in the community, and I don't know if there's a way that maybe we can figure out if churches would work together to provide the resources. Like I know Cornerstone has a huge resource. I don't know if there's a way that maybe we could get the pastors in the community to put their resources together. And if somebody feels uncomfortable coming here, maybe they can go there. I also know, from the physician perspective, through our Bexar County Medical Society, we have a line that we can call that provides health care for the medical community if we need it. And so I know that there are resources in that regard like that. There's also, I'm gonna need to call her. I can't think of her name right now. Actually, we're really good friends, which makes me mad that I can't think of her name right now. But she runs a nonprofit board. I will get to that as well. She runs a nonprofit that also sees patients without insurance and without Medicaid, and she has like HEB has given her like a prescription pad that she can write prescriptions for them, and HEB will fill them for free. So there are resources in the community. I think it would be nice if we could put them all together, figure it out, and have them for people if they need that. And maybe we can even put them on our website so that people can go to it and not necessarily have to call us. Our members have to call us if they don't feel comfortable reaching directly out to you, me, or somebody within the church.
Awesome. Well, this coming weekend, a new website or a new page on our website will go live where people can ask for help, and it will go to one of our pastors. So if you're dealing with anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, if they're dealing with grief and they just need help but they don't know where to start, there's going to be a new page on our website.
Praise God.
That now will come directly to the pastors, and depending on what's going on, we're going to be able to connect them with some resources.
Oh my gosh, you're blessing my heart.
So
you're blessing my heart.
For your time.
Absolutely.